Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I'm on one of these rolls with research today, so I'm going to discuss another meta-analysis that just came out this week. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. And you know, this is one of these sets of research that you guys know for me is bittersweet because it kind of forces me, like I had to do on this topic a year or two back, to admit that I may have been slightly wrong here. And we all hate to do that. We hate to do that. We hate to have to admit we're wrong. I've always believed that heavier weight done with higher volumes, meaning higher numbers of sets done with heavy weights, produces superior hypertrophy. I believed that for well over a decade. Well, the research coming out is showing that light weights, heavy weights, there's not much difference in terms of hypertrophy. I don't personally like to accept that, but the research is getting pretty strong at this point, almost to the point to where we can't deny it. And when you believe something and the overwhelming amount of data out there says, no, you really don't have this right, if you're going to be intellectually honest, you got to step back and go, okay, just like I've done with cardio, I've come full circle. You guys know I used to be anti-cardio for strength athletes, right? Now I promote that everyone doing, including strength athletes, based upon the data that's accumulated. I think if you're a power lifter or any other sort of strength athlete and you're not doing cardio, that you're shortchanging yourself. In fact, I think that athletes can handle large volumes of it and it will improve them all the way around the board. Now, that being said, what do we have? We have a meta-analysis from Dr. Brad Schoenfeld. As I like to call him Dr. Gaines. I think that's appropriate because he is pretty much one of the foremost, if not the foremost expert in the world on muscle hypertrophy. This is his obsession. In other words, this is someone whose PhD in research specializes in your gains, to put it in layman's terms. That's what he does. That's what he studies. He's obsessed with studying it in athletes, studying it in casual lifters, studying it with all sorts of people, trying to figure out how's the best way to get 1 or 2 or 3% more muscle growth. What are the factors? How can we manipulate it? He is obsessed with it and has dedicated his entire professional life into researching it in the laboratory so that we can understand how to give you guys another 1/4 inch under your biceps. All right, that's pretty much what that sums up. Now, the beauty of it is that everyone else gets to benefit from it. People who want more muscle, it's a pretty interesting dude to look into because this is what he's obsessed with. And I mean, he's managed to accumulate a lot of funding and grants towards this. Now, his newest meta-analysis, what does it find? Because like I said before, he did one a while back showing that when tonnage is equal, total workload is equal, that doing something like 7 sets of 3 gives just as much muscle gain as doing 3 sets of 10, meaning even those like 21 reps versus 30 reps, they end up being equal in terms of tonnage because you're using a heavier weight for the triples. If the weight roughly adds up, you can't tell the muscle growth apart over time. Like when you do studies on the people, you couldn't tell them apart. Both groups gained the same amount of muscle based upon the amount of weekly volume they did. Right? The weekly volume that they did is what determined how much muscle they gained, not the rep range. Now, when he's pulled this meta-analysis, he went through and looked at 21 different studies comparing rep ranges, percentages of your maxes, everything else, and what they produced. So he looked at 21 studies and broke down and compared each of those studies, trying to find the answer. Because again, you got to keep in mind, this is someone who his entire professional career is about obsessing over gaining that last ounce of muscle and how to get people to be able to get there, because that's what he wants. He wants everyone to be able to gain muscle easier. And you know what he found in this meta-analysis? Lightweight and heavyweight produce the same amount of muscle growth if you take all of them to similar levels of fatigue and work. All right? In other words, if you work hard, all rep ranges can produce similar amounts of muscle growth. Now, a lot of people would say, do we really need an expert to tell us this, that hard work produces muscle growth? A lot of people say that's common sense. Well, it is, but it isn't, because what we're looking at here is that, sure, hard work will always help you build muscle. I mean, let's be honest here. Working hard, training hard, of course, produces results. No one's questioning that. That is common sense at this point for anyone who's observed training. But what he's finding is that it doesn't matter what rep ranges you're working in. As long as you're working reasonably hard, you're not going to gain more muscle doing 10 rep sets than you are with 3 rep sets. You're not going to gain more muscle doing 10 rep sets than you are with 20 rep sets. As long as fatigue is present, as long as progressive workload is present, as long as the amount of work that you're doing is enough to stimulate the muscle growth, they all have the same muscle growth potential. Now, what he of course also says is that what he feels based upon his data over the years is that someone who really wants to gain the most muscle will actually do multiple rep ranges. All right. In other words, people who want to train purely that hypertrophy rep range may be shortchanging themselves a little bit of muscle. That you need to train the different rep ranges so that you get the full overlap of the spectrum. Which I think is wise words. That's good advice. And that's, again, the guy who studies this and obsesses over it in the lab is saying not only do all rep ranges produce similar potential for muscle, but people who actually train several different rep ranges throughout the year tends to do a little better. So if you're looking for your secret to muscle growth, train hard, train with enough volume, do enough work, but train multiple rep ranges. And if you get good and improve at several rep ranges, you will maximize the amount of muscle that you gain. That is what his research is showing. So there is kind of the secret, and that's something that isn't common sense. That's something that isn't widely understood, that all the rep ranges have similar potential. And when you combine them together, that's when you get the greatest potential. Now, what he also did find is that when it comes to 1 rep max strength, this wasn't equal, because we do know that doing 10 rep sets will improve your 1 rep max. Again, you don't go from being able to do 200 pounds on the bench press for 10 reps to doing 275 pounds on the bench press for 10 reps without your max going up. I think we all understand this. We all understand this. Your max will go up. You improve the amount of weight you're using on a 10 rep set by 50 or 70 or 80 pounds, your maxes will go up also. But what he did find is that 1 rep maxes do improve more from lifting really heavy. Lifting heavy loads with heavier weights. And again, I want to go back to the point of when we're talking about heavy loads, we mean doing the actual exercise. In other words, doing heavy lockouts on your bench isn't necessarily going to increase your full range of motion bench. All right. But that heavier weight usually produces better 1 rep maxes even when hypertrophy is equal. In other words, if you people who train a bunch of higher reps with lighter weights gain the same amount of muscle as people who do heavier weights, even though they gain the same amount of muscle, the people who lifted heavier tend to be a bit stronger. And that also makes sense that heavier weight probably produce a little more strength gains than lighter weight. Again, that's generally accepted. That's common knowledge, but it's interesting to note that because we do know that a large portion of your strength does come from hypertrophy. In other words, a bigger muscle produces more force. Anytime you make a muscle fiber grow, it automatically can produce more force now by default. So we know that hypertrophy does relate to strength, but heavier weights tend to give additional strength gains beyond just the hypertrophy. Again, it should be common sense, but it's nice to note it in the research. It is noted in the research, and the reason it's important to see that in the research is because this is when gains are equal. When muscle growth is equal, heavier weight tends to give a little better strength gains. But all around, particularly when workloads, tonnages, everything else are pretty close to each other, we can't tell a difference in the amount of muscle people gain from doing low reps, medium reps, high reps. They all put on similar amounts of muscle. None of them appear to be statistically better than another when we compare them. And that's what he's finding with his research. And this is, again, Dr. Gaines. This is a guy who is obsessed with it, of finding out how to gain the muscle. He's dedicated his entire life to it. And that's what he's saying. We can't tell them apart, but the people who use multiple rep ranges tend to get just a little bit more muscle growth. They have a little more muscle growth potential. And that's a good take-home message. And that's something, again, I think I've said for a long time, that periodization and everything else, people who periodize and use, whether it's concurrent training, undulating periodization, linear periodization, do tend to make slightly better gains. And that's something I have observed myself over the decades. So again, it's nice to see, again, some research, a researcher actually confirming it. That does seem to be the case. It may not be a big benefit, but it's still a benefit. So yeah, guys, go check out the meta-analysis. I'm going to link it down below for you guys. So I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.